Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another uLaw webinar. I welcome everyone who's joined us today for the timesheet and capital draws webinar within uLaw. This particular webinar has not been accredited for any CPD credits, so I just thought I'll get it out of the door. But it's going to be an interesting topic that many of our clients wanted us to share this session on, particularly on timesheets and on how you would manage injecting or infusing capital into your company, how you would use it amongst partners, and then if you are in the habit of drawing money out of the business to pay yourself, how would you reflect and represent that within uLaw? Okay, so this is going to be pretty much what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about timesheets and the different options that you have of representing the time spent. We also have very interesting reports that talk about the revenue by the individual partner or co-workers in the company, right? So if you're a solo practitioner, obviously you would still generate those timesheets so that you can appreciate, we have ways of generating timesheets by client. So if you're a solo practitioner, you certainly would still appreciate timesheet generating those to really understand, where you're spending your time on a specific time period. We'll look at how you can divvy up those time periods by client, by matter, by date. And then we'll obviously focus a little bit about some of the prerequisites to actually reflect and make that happen in uLaw, okay? Like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar obviously has this very short agenda. As I mentioned, understanding timesheets in uLaw, how to navigate into the uLaw product to generate these reports or timesheets for your business, for your legal business. We'll talk about how, with the click of a button, you can really understand the revenue that different partners within a law firm or a legal firm are providing or bringing into the practice. So if you really want to understand, what revenue has been brought by which partner in a particular month or week or time period, you can do so quite easily using these reports. And then obviously you would use that to, depending on your style of paying your employees, whether you pay them on the time spent or if it's a flat fee or a salary, regardless, you could use these timesheets to make better decisions. I'll talk about some examples as we go along of some of the larger law firms that use uLaw, how they do it to bring it to their boardroom on a daily and weekly basis to plan their week ahead. So you could pretty much plan your week based on the timesheet document themselves, really understand who's taking which file, how much time they're looking to spend, the estimated time, if you will, in a particular time period. Okay? So we'll primarily focus on timesheets. How would you reflect that? The prerequisites and how the contacts and rates menu options within uLaw become very important prerequisites of how you would represent dockets and time spent using the contacts co-workers tab, as well as the rates that you would associate within any particular matter. Okay? And then last but not the least, we'll focus on a different subject matter, which is how would you reflect the amount of capital that you or your other partners have invested in the firm. How would you generate reports that are important, very important, so that you can clearly understand the amount of money that's been brought in. How would you reflect capital draws? How would you represent even the monthly draws that you make from your business across your partners? Okay? So the agenda is fairly simple. It's going to be about a 45-minute to 50-minute webinar, but I'd like to leave some time if you have specific questions. But two focused subject areas that we want to focus based on our feedback on the subject matters that our clients wanted us to deliver these webinars. Again, reiterating for those who just joined us a bit late, today's webinar is not accredited for CPD sessions, but we would hope you would take away these key topics of how you can manage timesheets and capital within uLaw. Okay? And that's pretty much all we wanted to specifically focus on. We'll jump into the actual product itself to walk you through how you would validate these pieces of information, how you report on it, the different data elements that you would report on, etc. Now, for those who are joining us today, besides our clients who have heard us for the first time, we are a proud Canadian legal accounting, practice management, and business accounting software based out of Ottawa, Canada. And we serve, we're Canadian in the sense where our data is on the cloud, but it's hosted very much in Canada, and we only serve the needs of Canadian clients. So our database of clients pretty much are only and truly Canadian legal professionals that we serve. Okay, and feel free to give us a 30-day trial run. It's a no obligation trial, similar to your Netflix experience, but we just give you 30 days. If you need more time, we give you that extra time as well. The bottom line is we want you to be comfortable in understanding what we deliver as a value and then make an informed decision based on that. Okay. As if you've been part of the webinar series and have followed many of the webinars that I have provided, you would know Roger Moore, who's a ex-James Bond, obviously, but is the fictitious lawyer or legal professional that I would use during my demonstrations. So I'm logged into my uLaw account as the legal professional Roger Moore. Now, the small twist in today's story is, let's assume Roger Moore has been a solo practitioner, but he has now expanded his business. And we'll look at both these options. So we'll look at how Roger Moore as a solo practitioner would generate these timesheets and would reflect the draws and everything else. But even further, we'll talk about how Roger Moore, having expanded his firm, has now accepted a partner, and the firm now has, say, 2 assistants. Okay, so for a total of 4 individuals that are now working in this firm, and how you would represent data across all these 4 individuals. Okay, so primarily to generate your timesheet reports, you would navigate into the calendar menu option within uLaw, which pretty much walks you through the time that you've spent, right? And right under the action button, you obviously see the time-based reports. Okay, so obviously have compliance documents, such as work in progress, which is very important in a multi-firm situation or in a solo situation. We provide you with insight for the planned work and the work that is yet to be done. Okay, and the work meaning whether you've docketed the time, or you've planned to docket and you haven't docketed, or if you've docketed the time but are yet to generate an invoice to reflect that revenue. Okay, so we'll start with just a simple timesheet, and we'll include the client summary. And as you can see, with any report in uLaw, you can do it over a wide date range. So for purposes of this demo, let me just demonstrate that for the month of August, and let me generate that monthly timesheet report. Okay, and there's that timesheet, and a standard timesheet report in uLaw actually divvies it up by date. Okay, so it just divides the whole report itself and groups it by the date across all of the individuals involved. Okay, so this is kind of a default group by date in ascending order. So from the earliest date of 3rd of August, here are the 3 items that were worked on by the firm as reported in uLaw. You had Stacy, who's a co-worker or an assistant. We were assuming Stacy and Janet to be the assistants of the firm, and we're assuming Mr. Roger Moore and his partner Abhidir Singh to be the 2 partners of the firm. Okay, and we looked at how Stacy has docketed or an estimated 30 minutes, but has not billed that particular client, and there could be many reasons for that, right? But it still tracks the time. Then you have, at the very same time, for the same client, you had Janet as well contributing to that file with an estimated time of 30 minutes, but not necessarily billing the client. So you can see there's a bit of work estimated but not billed. So something that you may want to have a conversation about. And you go further, you see how at a flat rate, you had about 30 minutes spent and you've charged, or the client was charged 30 minutes, and you get the picture. So it groups it by date, and if you don't see a name, it's basically the default licensee in this case, which is Mr. Roger Moore. Okay, you can see specifically Mr. Abdir Singh spent 30 minutes, but actually he went on charge 1 hour and 12 minutes for Mr. Avatar Singh as an example. And when you actually come down to the end of the entire month, you see the total billable hours and the total estimated hours. So you had estimated about 34 hours to be spent over this month. Again, this is a demo site, so please don't look into the actual numbers, but let's try and see if we can take the essence out of this whole demo. But you had estimated 34 hours for this month, but you ended up spending only 31 hours. So it kind of gives you a good perspective of how you can better budget your time, how you can better budget the money that you plan on making or the expected revenue that you have, right? And then we break it down further by client. This may be an interesting perspective for you to look at as to, for that time period, who are the served clients, right? From Mr. Mal Johnson to ABCD Inc., you have not only the estimated hours that you hope to spend in that month for that client, but it also gives you the actual billable hours as we know it till this particular date and time, right? You can see where for Timothy Blake, it was exactly 3.5 hours, and you've stuck to that. Kudos on sticking to the plan. But in some other cases, in fact, for Mr. Smith, you had estimated 4 hours, but you ended up billing the person 6 hours. Very good for a law firm, a legal firm. But if you look at, Avon Inc. or even John Ginster, you had estimated an hour and a half. Now, this could be many reasons. As I said, this could be a flat fee situation. It could have been a pro bono that you're offering the client. It could have been many different situations. But from a timesheet perspective, purely from a time spent summarization, this is kind of what we've got out of the system today for you to review. Okay? And you may be fairly okay with the overall estimated and billable hours because it's almost close to 90% of what you had estimated, right? And last but not the least, we kind of look at the categorization, if you will, between the actual partners in the firm and the amount of time that the assistants had spent. So you have an opportunity now in uLaw to actually have multiple different types of co-workers and have accounts for them. So you could actually have your own account for Abdir Singh. You could have your own account for your assistants. The assistants could actually share the same username password if they need to. If you really need them tracking their time by their individual name and the role that they play, we now give owners of these law firms or legal firms the opportunity to do so. Now, in the case of a solo practitioner, obviously it's fairly simple, where you're not going to have, it's purely yourself. There are no assistants, so you wouldn't see that. So all the time that you see would be the time that you had estimated and the time that you had still billed. Equally important, if not more important, in a solo business where you have very limited access to additional resources to help you out, this report kind of gives you a very, very good understanding of how you're spending your time in your firm. Okay, obviously, in a solo practitioner's perspective, you would not have other co-workers contributing to a file. All the time spent on these files would be the individual's time spent. So in this case, it would just be Roger Moore and his solo firm, right? But it would be equally important to still understand how Roger's time was spent across his clients in the month of August. Last but not the least, again, in a multi-firm situation, you obviously have better sense or better value for this data, which is divided by individual service provider name, or could be co-worker, the total estimated hours and the billable hours. In the case of a solo practice, you would only see Mr. Roger Moore, where he spent 29 hours, or estimated to spend 29 hours, but spent about 24 hours in that particular month. So all we've generated so far is a standard timesheet that at the end of the month gives you a great perspective of how time was spent in that particular firm, whether it's a solo practice or whether time spent across other individuals or coworkers working with you in that firm. Okay? So that's the first check. So all I did was get into calendar, action, and under calendar, I generated the timesheet. That's the time spent. Now let's look at timesheet specifically divided by employee, and I will do that again for the month of August. Now what we've done, again, it's the same data, but slightly different representation. Okay. Now this, we group it by the individual co-workers in the company or employees in the company. So starting with Mr. Abdir Singh, who I mentioned to you in this particular story that we're building, is a partner of Mr. Roger Moore. Okay. So now it's grouped by the individual co-worker or partner or assistant, and then grouped further by date. Okay. So the only two dates that so this gives you the same data elements, but if you group it by the individual, it kind of gives you a slightly different picture. So right away you could see that Mr. Abdir Singh had just worked on 2 days on 2 different matters, or maybe it was the same matter. So he just worked across 2 days, and he spent a total of 2 hours, say, right, over this particular month. You can see he worked on Mr. Abdir Singh's file record search as a docket for the same matter, AS 25066, and then he had another docket for a final report of purchase. Then you have it classified or grouped by Ms. Janet Gray, who's the assistant. You can see Janet has spent considerable amount of time, or 5 or 6 days, working on these different files. Okay, so what we do, or law firms do, is they actually print this. They don't have to necessarily, but they do sometimes print this and then bring it to the table for the amount of time spent, estimated, and really discuss and strategize what happened the previous week and what can happen in the forthcoming week as well, because then you consider just the estimated time. So the estimated time in uLaw is where you can actually go into a matter and you can say, I have a court date for the 16th of September, right? And let's say you anticipate spending at least 3 hours during that court date, or maybe 1 hour. So you put that time, we capture that time as well. You obviously wouldn't bill that client yet because the September 16th hasn't come, but you can plan in advance what you're actually going to do across all your files, if you like, for the whole month or the whole year, if you know the clients that you're working with. So if you really know how you're going to divvy up your time, you can docket it in uLaw, and that becomes an estimated effort. All right, so then we move to the Mr. Roger Moore. As you can see, he had spent over 29 hours, so August 4th was a very busy day, and then it kind of spreads across the entire month. And last but not the least, you have Stacy, and then it talks about how Stacy, as the assistant in this particular case, worked across, the entire month. And this is the same representation that we had in our default timesheet, which was grouped by time. The timesheet by employee groups the entire data set by the employee, him or herself. Okay? So right away, within the last 6 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, we've looked at timesheet and we've looked at timesheet by employee. Now let's look at client revenue. Actually, let's do revenue by employee. So this is a very, very commonly used report. So revenue by employee is where we capture the time spent and the time billed. In fact, it's a time invoiced. Right? So let's say I planned to spend 1 hour on 24th of August. I went ahead and billed the client 1 hour and generated the invoice. That's considered as the revenue for that month because you've generated the invoice, right? So if I were to generate the revenue by employee report, this now translates the time multiplied by that individual's rate, or depending on whether it's a flat fee or not, you can look at it purely from, as you can see, we looked at estimated hours, billable hours, and the actual revenue. So we've grouped it by the individual employee. So the previous report, let me just try and compare this side by side. So in the report where we just had the timesheet by employee, we only had the time spent. So estimated billable hours. What we've added in the revenue column is this third column here, which actually says, all right, that's fine, but what's the revenue that that particular time spent has generated? So Mr. Abadir Sping has brought in about $300 this month through the dockets that he has invoiced. Okay? So this third column becomes that much more important to kind of really translate the time into money. If time is truly money, then this is truly a translation of what that money is for the time spent. So it's the same 31 hours spent, but if you look at the revenue section, you know that the total partners have brought in about $8,000, whereas the time spent by the assistant reflected in about $235. And that's purely based on the rates and obviously the time, yeah? So you can add this up to the $8,400, you got $7,600, and the extra $800 coming across the other 3 employees. Same difference. So if you look at the timesheet and the summary of it, you had the estimated hours, the billable hours. The difference between that and the revenue report by employee is this third column, which is revenue. It says perfect. It was the same, 1 hour and 48 minutes. But the revenue brought in is $180, right? And these are the actual invoiced numbers. So let's continue down that path. So if you look at timesheet, we've looked at revenue by employee, timesheet by employee. You could also look at the client revenue summary. So let's have a quick look at that. So this is a revenue summary by client. For certain silos of practice, this becomes important, right? If you're actually dealing with certain silos, like such as if you're dealing with corporate clients, then this becomes very important for you to review by client. Where are you, spending the money in that particular month? And if you have, I don't know, top 10 clients, you want to make sure that the time that you're spending with them is meaningful, especially if you have a billable time contract with these companies, right? So you look at the service clients for the month of August, again, same list, starting with Mr. Amal Johansson to ABCD Inc. I believe there's a similar report by client. I apologize for. Nevertheless, let's quickly look at that again. The bottom line of this report then is the actual client, the estimated hours that you had planned for, as I mentioned, the actual billable hours, and the revenue, which is truly the billed hours. That's how we calculate the revenue. If it's invoiced, you lock it as a revenue for that month. Yeah. Obviously, the AR, the accounts receivable, is a totally different ballgame. So often we get confused: is this money collected, or is the difference between realized and recognized revenue? The revenue in this case, just to be clear, are all the invoiced revenue expectation, whether it's been paid already or because that depends on the actual term of payment. So that becomes a different proposition. What people are looking for, especially even in big companies, people are looking for the invoiced revenue, right? So that it's kind of in the books. So these are all the invoiced revenue numbers across the clients. So you've got the same $8,400, but now you've got two different sides to it. One is, how did this 8,400, who put the most effort to generate this 8,400? It was Roger Moore. And across your clients, who contributed most for that 8,400 to happen? And obviously it was Smith Johansson, who you'd spend almost 6 hours this month. But if you look at Mr. John Abraham, you've spent almost 9.5 hours, but it's only yielded in about $1,000. So again, using this report allows you to make informed decisions and have very smart conversations, whether it's within yourself or whether within it's your firm, but to make informed decisions about how you can be more efficient, smarter with your money and your time. Okay, that's truly what timesheets are meant for, is assessing how you've spent it, and if there are certain learnings that you can take from how you've spent it, you can apply it in the forthcoming weeks to be smarter and more efficient, right, in your business. Okay. So we've looked at the timesheet, revenue by employee, timesheet by employee, and we could maybe certainly look at the client and the service spent together in one report. Again, these are, as I mentioned earlier, it's the same data sets. I mean, the data side's based on the work that you've put in as you continue to docket your time. And we'll look at that example in a second. Well, we'll start a new client, and we'll try and walk you through how different individuals can contribute there. So what this has done is it's kind of given you a better view of combining these two together. It's combined the actual client, and it's combined the time spent. So as I mentioned, this one report basically tells you where that 8,400 came from, right? So let me just close down these reports, and then let's take some time just to understand how did you go about docketing, and how did this come about being reflected in these reports? Okay, so we'll take a quick example of a client, and we'll start docketing. We'll generate some invoices, and then regenerate these reports so you can start to appreciate how it got into that report to begin with, so that you can make that as part of your daily docketing practice or discipline, acknowledging the reports that you're going to be able to generate to make informed decisions. Okay, so you really know why you're taking certain actions. So it's important that you docket your time, because you want to keep a tab on the time spent and the money that you can generate out of that time spent. But if there's a certain discipline or indiscipline in how you go about doing that, these weekly, monthly reflection on timesheet would allow you to better understand what that indiscipline or discipline is, to improve upon that. That's the bottom line. Okay? And after we've gone through that simple example, I'll jump then gears into looking at capital draw and then the monthly drawings. Okay? And we'll call it a day, and we'll wish ourselves a great long weekend. But in the meantime, I kindly do request you to use the chat window. We've already started getting some quick questions. If you can kindly expand on the question, there's a quick question on when is a good time to post them. So it's a quick question on whether today's CPD is what it's called. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make sure that I got this right off my chest in the first few lines. Today's session is not accredited for CPD. So it's we had our CPD session last week. Today's session is not a CPD session, but it's I can certainly share the name of the, as you can see, we generate these emails to you every day. So today's topic is timesheets in uLaw, but we've kind of expanded to also include the draw and capital, because it was part of a survey that we made with our clients. Okay, fair enough. For those who don't get the email, today's webinar is called Timesheets in uLaw. Unfortunately, it's not accredited for CPD. Okay. So we've looked at timesheets in general. Hopefully it gave you a better perspective of how you would generate it and why you should generate. And you can apply this to any product. It doesn't have to be uLaw. uLaw is an option that for those who are exploring options can look at. and we certainly encourage and we do our best to put our best foot forward. But if you look at any other product, you should expect the ability to have these timesheets generated based on how you want them generated, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly, and also kind of give you those important data sets or elements, which are the estimated time, the actual build time, and how it reflected in the revenue. And then figure out if that's exactly what you wanted to accomplish that particular week or month, right? So these timesheets also allow you to compare the planned revenue and the actual revenue that you've generated that particular month. There's a quick question. I'll take a quick segue about the calendar itself and how long it's stored. We don't necessarily delete calendar items. Obviously, they're all part of dockets. So the quick answer is they remain to be as part of the system that you can always search up, and we don't delete them. Because if you can look at it, we manage two different types of calendars. One is your actual personal time, right? So let's say monthly reconciliation is something that this lawyer has set up for him to do every month at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a Friday. That's today. But if you actually go about to showcase all of the dockets that are related, show time dockets, this is going to show you how the calendar is spread across this particular month. Now, we do integrate, and you can do that over the week, or the month, the agenda day, etc. What's important is we do have a calendar in our app. So if you do download our app, if you use the product, or if you like to use the product, we do have an app that we provide that you can download, and that would connect with your individual phone, whether it's iOS or Samsung or Android-based, whatever the phone may be. It connects right and provides you all these notifications right through your device. If you have an Outlook, we integrate with that. If you have through a Cal, and through our app, we integrate with your phone as well. Okay, let me get back to kind of the aspect of the webinar itself. So we looked at how these different timesheets reflected different data sets across a firm of 4 members, okay? Then as my presentation had indicated, there's a bit of a prerequisite of how, for those who don't necessarily understand how this went about. Where did I associate the time that's spent on a matter across the 3 or 4 individuals in a company? So that's where the concept of associating contacts, and especially the contacts of type co-workers, and then associating them as part of the rates group in a matter becomes very important. For those who followed us in our previous webinars, we would have looked at how uLaw utilizes contacts in various different avatars, right? So we use contacts to also pre-populate your client information in documentation in a matter. We also utilize the information you provide within the contacts to also pre-populate and associate as parties or additional parties in a matter. And for certain silos of legal practice, we use that information as well to pre-populate court forms. Okay, so we associate contacts into matters predominantly using our additional parties. So if I go into let's say a matter, so I'm going to look into Mr. Avatar Singh, who's a client of Mr. Roger Moore and his firm. So you have about 6 dashboard or tabs in a matter. So you've got your matter events, right? These are all your dockets. You've got disbursements, where you're actually spending money for disbursements. You have the additional parties, where you can actually add a party, and you can choose from the various types of party associations that you may have between contacts in a particular matter. So if this was a plaintiff-defendant situation, you can actually mark the defendant. So let's say you say defendant, and you can search up the entire database of our contacts and associate Mr. Harvey to be a defendant, right, in this particular matter. Now, this is one association. Now, for the purposes of the time and the co-worker relationship, we associate contacts under rates. And the only contacts that show up are core workers. And if you look at our contacts menu option, which is really where you would create your client, etc., you have a particular group called co-workers. And if you look at that, you've got obviously, apart from Roger Moore, who's the main licensee here, you have 3 co-workers working with Roger Moore. So you've got Mr. Abhidir Singh, you've got Janet Gray, and you've got Stacy G. From a uLaw contact perspective, the individual role that they play when you store it under contacts does not matter. But when we set up these accounts for you, for Stacy and Avatar or Abhidir and others to have their own login, we will set it up in such a way whether they're a co-worker, assistant, or whatever their role is within the company. And if you go into your settings and go into the permissioning model, you as the owner of the firm can now decide what components of uLaw you want these different roles to view and have access to. Okay? So you've got certain roles that you can provide your assistants, in this case Stacy and Janet, for example, and let's say Mr. Abhidir is a co-worker, you as the owner or part co-worker, that's, situation, whether it's a 50-50 or whatever is the partnership relationship, you can set that up to give personalized preferences for access. Okay? So I've gone ahead and created these different contacts and associated them as co-workers that are going to work with me in this firm. Now let's go about just creating a simple client. So I would say add new contact. Let me add a client. I'll say this is Nancy Drew. And through an advertisement. So through my Google AdWords campaign, Nancy Drew got to know Mr. Roger Moore as a legal professional. Let's just put a quick address for Nancy. Say Ontario, Canada. We'll put that as the mailing address. All done. Let's go ahead and click the Save button. It's as simple as that to create that client. Now let's go ahead and create a matter. And let's start to see how you can build up dockets and associate, and we'll maybe bring up the idea of all the 4 individuals in this company working together in serving Nancy Drew because she's a celebrity, let's say. Okay? Okay, so let me go ahead and click on the matter button so that I can create a new file or a matter for Nancy Drew. So I'll give it a simple title. Okay, so let's just say it's an employment law. Let's say Nancy Drew is fighting Hollywood. Universal Studios, let's say. Okay, so this is where you have these different tabs, right? So when you want to associate, or if you appreciate that there are going to be multiple individuals in your firm collaborating with you as the legal professional on a particular file, that's when you think about using the Rates tab to bring these in different individuals. Just like how we used additional parties for court forms and other documents for representing the different revenue streams and the individuals that bring that revenue stream, you would use the Rate tab. So let's assume say Stacy is the assistant of Mr. Roger Moore. So A1 really stands for Assistant 1. And let's say L2 is Mr. Abdir Singh, and Abdir's assistant, I believe. Oh, let's just save this. It's been a long day, so my memory's not serving me right. Let me take a quick second to really understand who was that other person who we're working with. That's Janet. Okay. So I'll jump into my dashboard. I'll look at my recently modified matters. I should see Nancy's information. There it is. Employment contract breach. And I'll say A2 is the assistant 2, so you can have more than 10 different individuals involved in any time. So let's associate rates. So again, if you have certain timelines for rates, we automatically change it based on that. Okay. So we're saying Roger Moore's rate is $400. His assistant rate is $75. We're saying the same thing with Abidjar, but let me just change it for sake of purposes of this demo to 300, and I'll change this to $50. Okay, just for the purpose of the demo. So now I've associated. Technically, I haven't used their effort into the matter yet, but I'm kind of preparing this under rates to say that these are the individuals that may be working. And once you get into the docket, let's say I put an initial, let's say the client intake interview was done by assistant 2 or assistant 1. You can use this toggle button. So this is really our toggle arrow that allows you to either toggle the entire docket as a flat rate, or you can actually understand who within the firm, whether it's an assistant, whether it's a legal counsel, and this could be names too. Right now we have it as L1, L2, but this could be the actual names. I'll say A1 spent 1 hour at $75 an hour. Okay, so you've got now one docket at the A1 rate of $75. So the A1 is the default assistant, $75. Now let's say initial client meeting. This meeting was between Nancy and Roger to discuss the matter. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click apply, and I'll apply the same 1 hour on it. Now if you notice here, there's actually this other time that we capture. So that is truly the estimated time. Okay, so let's say you had planned, so this is planned time. So if you plan for 30 minutes, but you're actually charging the client 1 hour, then obviously that's great for the law firm, right? This is how we capture the estimated time and the actual time spent. And the reason for that is because we can actually plan your time. You can say, I have a court date, as I said, on the 16th of September, right? I can plan ahead of time. So I can say on the 21st, I have a court, 10 court. Obviously, I will not charge this individual at any time, right? So let me just go back to the original script that I was trying to work with. So let's assume this was in the morning. So it's 10 a.m. That was the interview. At about 12 p.m., Mr. Roger Moore met with her. Let's say at about 1 p.m., you had a second intake interview. And this time, this was with Janet. So you could say, all right, who worked on that docket? It was Janet. Would automatically pick her 1 hour. And I'll say finally at about 2:30, she met with second client meeting, and this time this with L2 and the same 1 hour. I'll go ahead and save that. So you've got 1 hour across all the different individuals, and you've associated 4 different legal professionals in a firm working on a matter. Okay? So now if I go ahead and do my calendar, do my timesheet, hopefully this reflects the time that we spent on it. Okay, this is by date. I hope it should be easier to capture that. There it is. So on the 31st at 12 p.m. we had the initial meeting for an hour. The planned time was 30 minutes. Then Janet actually had a 30-minute but billed the client 1 hour because we left it at a default 30 minutes on purpose so that you can appreciate the estimated time and the actual time billed. Okay. In most of the law firms, this may be the other way around. You may actually spend more time than what you bill your client, but then we'll kind of take a more than ideal situation here for the purpose. And you can see the total estimated hours just went up from 32 to 36. Okay. Now let's go one step further, and this is where we looked at revenue. And to make that happen, you actually have to go about generating an invoice. So let's go ahead and do that too. So let me go ahead and because of the time that we have, I'll go ahead and generate a complete invoice, though we ideally recommend that you generate a pre-bill. In fact, if you by default start to generate a complete bill, we once again remind you, or we purposely ask you if you want to skip the preview. We basically don't allow you to generate an invoice if you haven't previewed it, okay? Unless you're in a rush like today, you want to go ahead and skip that preview and generate the invoice. Otherwise, please generate a preview or a pre-bill so that even if you made a mistake, you've forgotten that disbursement or you've changed the number, you can go and correct it in uLaw before you generated an actual invoice. Okay? So let me now click download. And if I were to review my invoice quickly for Nancy, you would notice that you can actually color, you can provide different colors for different staff right in your settings, but you can see the different rates associated with the different tasks that have been accomplished and the different rates that have been charged with the taxes. Right now this invoice is generated and the revenue is locked for this month. If now I go into my calendar and let's generate that revenue by employee. So again, when I'm creating the story and it's a broad brush, essentially what I'm trying to indicate is this is how you would associate the different individuals in the company to be working and collaborating on the file. And this doesn't have to be on the same file. Even if it's on different files, it would be the same thing. Okay? So you've got Abadir, who's brought in that $300 today because of that 1 hour that he spent. You've got Janet, who obviously brought the extra 1 hour at $50. You've got Roger Moore, and you brought in that $400 today. Yeah. And you've got, last but not the least, Stacy, who did that initial interview at $75. So the revenue just with that 4 people, that particular new matter that just came in, went up from $8,400 something to $9,200 today. So that's how that's reflected. And that was kind of the whole cycle that I wanted to showcase. Again, doing a quick recap, we created the contacts and we associated co-workers as part of the firm. And as I said, I mean, a big part of our user group is still solo practitioners, and we want to empower them. So even from a solo practitioner's perspective, this is very important information, generating these timesheets, and then revenue by employee would by default just be yourself. But our hope and goal is that sometime those solo practitioners grow in their firm because they're going to be more reputable, more files to manage. And when you do get to that situation, we as a product that you've trusted should grow along with you, and that's the feature set that we're looking to invest and add into the product, right? So that even if you as now grow from a solo practice to a 2-member team, so you just hired yourself an assistant, you are able to still use the product and really understand how time's spent in your firm, okay? So the question is there a category for associates? The categories that we have currently, depending on the role, we ask you if you want to add another individual to your firm's license, whether it's an assistant, right, or if it's a co-worker, and then we have an accountant. So sometimes law firms may have their own bookkeeper accountant. I mean, uLaw today provides our own bookkeeping service and our own accounting service, but many of law firms have their own bookkeepers and accountants, and they, in today's context, want to use technology to avoid them having to travel and charge them for that too. So instead, they would give their accountants certain restricted access to information that they need to do their work, right? So you can restrict what you want to give your accountant access to. So those are the 3 categories, and we broadly classify associates either as an assistant or a co-worker based on the type of work that they accomplish. If they own the client, then it's obviously not an assistant. You know, certain questions like that would define the role they play. Okay, with another 8 minutes left in our clock, let's go ahead and move on to our next part of what I wanted to showcase, which is bringing capital into the firm. Okay. So the last question is if you have a subcontractor. Okay, so we have another webinar that's coming up for that. That's a good question. But we have a classification called vendors. So that's a totally different side of the story that we'd like to specifically focus on about how you would use vendors, subcontractors, if you will, as a stand-in or other areas that you may use them. But these, we primarily are focusing on co-workers who are part of your firm. Okay. Now, moving on to the capital. So let's say you've just started your firm, yeah? Again, there are different styles to how you operate your firm. But one such style is where you invest money or you infuse capital into your firm. Okay, so you have that 10 grand or 5 grand or $1,000 that you've just started up your business, you deposit it into your business's general account. So that's a capital, that's a big money. It's not you spending money to buy a laptop. So that's where you spend money using your own money or own pocket to spend for an expense, an office expense. So that's a different thing. I want you to consider capital as an investment that you're making. So you're depositing, let's say, 5 grand into the company, so that that can then be used for other expenses, salaries, etc. So that's a big sum of a lump sum of money that you're putting into the business. How do you reflect that? How do you track that? And you need to track that too, because you still need to figure out how much of capital you've invested, and if you're going to be drawing money out of your business. So that's another style of how you operate. So if you're a solo practitioner, well, you can go the high-end way of incorporating the law firm or the legal firm, making yourself as an employee of that legal firm, and then paying yourself a salary. But the examples that we've come across mostly are solo practitioners who just draw money, a certain amount of money every month from the firm, obviously to pay for personal expenses and to run your life, right? So we're going to focus on how you would reflect the initial investment of capital, manage and report on it, and then also how would you reflect the monthly draws that you and your other partners make and how to reflect that, and the reporting that you have to support so that at the end of the year, you really have a good idea of how much of capital each partner has invested and how much they have drawn out of the firm. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. Before I go about putting a capital and drawing all that, let me draw your attention to actually generating the situation as it stands today. So we don't know what Roger Moore's firm situation is. So to understand that, I will go into my reports, and under the other category, I have two reports right under here. Fairly simple, report on capital, report on drawings, okay? So if I were to click on report on capital, I want to know for the whole year who within my firm has invested or infused capital, and on what dates, and how much is the total money invested. So this is January 2018 till now. So you can see many people have come and gone. You can see this gives you a good picture. Maybe Courtney and Karen are not part of the company anymore, but it's only Mr. Abadir and Roger Moore. But you see Roger Moore has invested almost $17,900, right? And then you've got Mr. Abadir Singh having invested about $3,000. Okay? Maybe Courtney and Karen aren't working partners, right? They could be investment partners. Now let me go ahead and generate another report just so you get a better sense, which is report on drawings. So we want to understand so far for the whole year how much of money has been taken out of the business. Okay, so far Mr. Abadir Singh has taken $1,000 and Roger Moore about $6,400. Okay. So knowing what we know, we've got Roger Moore about $6,400 drawn. He's invested about $18,000. You've got Mr. Abadir Singh about $3,000, and he's drawn $1,000. Now let's reflect some additional drawing and some additional investment. So let's say now Roger Moore is investing another $5,000 into the business today. Okay. So how you'd go about doing that, reflecting it in uLaw, is the data entry tab action, and we have a separate menu option called capital. And this is where you have the 4 different options that you can use to reflect the data entry for whatever is the situation. So that first time, or this lump sum infusion or injection, they call it capital injection, they call it this lump sum capital injection that happens. Whether you're just getting started with uLaw and you've just started your business, this is one of the first steps that you would do. Or at any interim point in time when you're running your business, you can do that too. So let's say today, and you can choose who it is for. So these are the 4 individuals in your firm, right? So you've got Roger Moore, and I'm going to say capital investment for marketing expenses. Okay? So let's say there's this grand legal marketing space that you want to be at, and Roger Moore is investing about $5,000. Now the next section is really where did the money go into, right? So went into your general account, and maybe Roger Moore just transferred it from his bank account into the general account. Okay? This is his personal money that he's investing, and he's injecting as capital into this firm, Roger Moore, legal firm, Inc., whatever. So I'm going to say $5,000 today, and for that reason, and I hit submit. Interestingly enough, you don't even have to look at reports. You can just go and look at your general account, wherever you deposited that, and you're going to notice that there is a deposit of $5,000, or technically you should see that in the bank, but you would see it in the bookkeeping software that you reflected that $5,000 that was invested today. And let's go back and generate that same report on capital. Obviously, you should see fairly straightforward. You should see Mr. Roger Moore having invested close to $22,000. Right? We had $1,700 1,000 something before, now he's added another 500. Simple math. Okay? So that's how you would reflect capital injection and then report on it, track it, manage it, and maintain it. If I were to go back, I can basically withdraw that entire capital. Okay, so let's say for some reason I said, all right, that's $5,000. It's not right. I only wanted to do $2,000, reducing investment. I'm going to take away another $2,000, so I'm just putting $3,000. I can do that. Okay. So for every practical situation in a firm, you can do that. I mean, let me reflect the draw. So you see, we did not see a draw. So far, Mr. Roger Moore has drawn $64,000. But if you actually do a draw report just for the month of August, or maybe it's still August, so we haven't seen a draw for Mr. Roger Moore. So let's say Mr. Roger Moore draws $2,000 out of the business today. So you'd basically say, all right, I want to do a drawings transfer for Mr. Roger Moore. August 2018 draw. Let's say $2,000. It's been taken out of my general account. And let's say the business gave Mr. Roger Moore a check. You can print that check too. Okay, so that's money leaving the business and going into Mr. Roger Moore. So everybody else in the firm obviously need to know that. So if you do a report on drawings, you now know for the whole year, or you can do it for the month. So Mr. Roger Moore so far till date has drawn $8,400. If you specifically need to know it for a date range, you can do that too. Right? So you can say a date range 1st to the 31st. There you go. Okay? So obviously, the last step was, again, specifically handling a question from one of our clients to be done as a webinar about how would you handle capital and how would you draw from uLaw or reflect a draw that you made from your business in the product. So hopefully this kind of helps you understand the whole concept of how you inject this lump sum capital into your business. And if you're actually drawing and taking money out of out of your business into yourself, pay yourself, that draw needs to be reflected on a monthly basis so that you can reconcile your accounts appropriately. Because if money has left your general account, then when you do your general reconciliation, and if you've not reported that draw, the bank is obviously going to have $1,000 lesser than what it shows in your books in uLaw. Okay? Then the books wouldn't match, and then you would have to anyway go back and reflect this draw at the time of reconciliation. Okay? So once again, I hope this session was your time well spent and meaningful. We looked at how you can generate your timesheets, the different facets of those timesheets, which are revenue, right? How would you associate the actual timesheet by date, by individual employees, and also by time spent across clients? We looked at how you use the Contact Co-workers tab to associate employees or individuals in a firm, and then associate them as part of rates as L1, L2, A1, A2, reflecting each docket being spent by those individual employees. Finally, reflecting the individual revenue streams that they bring to the table. And we looked at how you would reflect capital draws as well as, capital injections, as well as how you would draw out of your business. So if there are any more further questions, because I've obviously gone about 5 to 6 minutes over time, would highly request or entertain questions via email. If you could kindly email us at support@uLawPractice.com, We will do our best to answer those questions. If you have any specific questions about the product itself, please do reach out to us at support, or you can visit our website and fill out a simple 30-day trial form, and that gives us the opportunity to have a conversation with you. Okay? So once again, thank you very much for joining me in today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar next Friday, and have yourself a fantastic long weekend. Thank you.